welcome to the National Press Club and to the start of another series of Kalb Reports, co-sponsored by the George Washington University, the Shorenstein Center on the Press, Politics, and Public Policy at Harvard, the National Press Club, and for this program, the Newseum. I'm Marvin Kalb, a senior fellow at the Shorenstein Center, and it's been my pleasure to host these monthly public policy forums since 1994. Our program tonight is called Facing the Future, the Media, Politics, and Morality in an Age of Terrorism. This has been a very special day for all of us, marked nationwide by commemoration, celebration, mourning, remembrance, pride, and patriotism. At some point, I think we all remembered that on 9/11, another sparkling day, by the way, the United States was attacked by terrorists and some 3,000 people were killed, most of them Americans. A special day, of course, requires a special panel, and that we have. To my right, Professor Elie Wiesel of Boston University, author of more than 40 books. His latest is called The Judges, an exceptional book, and I thank him for writing it. I enjoyed it very much. He is the winner of many prizes, among them the Presidential Medal of Freedom, and in 1986, the Nobel Peace Prize, for his determined effort to remind people of the horrors of the Holocaust. When he was 15 years of age, the Nazis took him and his family to Auschwitz, where his mother and younger sister perished. His father died in another death camp called Buchenwald. Elie survived. To my left, Theodore Cardinal McCarrick, the Archbishop of Washington. He was ordained a priest in 1958. He became a member of the College of Cardinals in March, I believe, of last year. He has been a strong advocate of human rights and religious freedom, a message he has carried to many countries, including China, Cuba, and Saudi Arabia. He also has a PhD from the Catholic University of America. Again, to my right, Dr. Madeleine Albright, a professor at the Georgetown School of Foreign Service and a distinguished scholar at the University of Michigan Business School. Dr. Albright was the 64th Secretary of State, but she was also the first woman to hold that job, and that distinction makes her the highest ranking woman ever to serve in the U.S. government. I believe I'm right on that. She is now the president of the Albright Group. And to my left, Susan Eisenhower, president and CEO of the Eisenhower Institute, which was established to advance President Dwight Eisenhower's legacies in foreign and domestic policy. Ms. Eisenhower is a widely known expert in U.S.-Russian relations. She has lectured on Russia and the West at the Kennedy School of Government. She's written 3 books, hundreds of op-ed pieces, and has appeared regularly as a television commentator. So, welcome to you all, and let's get down to work. When President Bush was first informed that the planes had hit the Twin Towers, he told himself, quote, "We're at war." Since then, the president has said time and time again that we are at war against terrorism with a global reach, war against states that harbor or sponsor terrorism. Now, for most of the students in this very large audience, for most of them, 9/11 was probably the defining moment of their generation, of their lives. How can we make this catastrophe a bit more meaningful to them? Because if it is war that we're involved in, how are we coping with this war? What are the right things that we have done? What are the wrong things that we have done? And I would like to start with Professor Wiesel, and then we will just go straight around. Professor Wiesel, why don't you start us?
Well, there is war, but the terrorists began it. 3,000 people died. 19 young men decided on their own that they have more power than all of us. They have the right to decide who shall live and who shall die at that particular moment. And they chose the date, the hour, the day, and the space, and the action, and the method. What baffled me right away was the method they used. I have studied the history of terrorism, all for personal reasons. I have written a book, my first novel, about terrorism. And I wanted to know, what was it that made some people choose violence as a language? These terrorists did something else. For the first time in the history of terrorism, they left no message. They didn't say what they wanted. They didn't protest against anything, against anybody. They used no words. They simply chose death as a language. Death became their language, as if to say, you don't deserve our words. You don't deserve our language. All we can have in common with you is death. Well, that's war.
Dr. Albright?
Well, I think the hardest part about it is that it is not war in the classical sense that we have all learned about it. It is not, does not come from one territory. It doesn't have armies that are lined up somewhere that have ranks and everything. And there is therefore no address, basically, how to direct our anger, because the people are dispersed all over the world and hiding, and therefore it's very hard to define it in the classical terms of war. I think the hard part generally is how you get people to understand that this is a threat to what is the purpose of any country's foreign policy, to protect your territory, your people, and your way of life, when we as Americans have lived for 230 plus years in a territory that basically was invincible except for the War of 1812. And I think that that is the hardest part for Americans to grasp, that it is a very different kind of war, and that for the first time our territory was pierced.
But no question in your mind that we are at war.
Well, I think that, you know, as a classical international law case, it probably is not. But it is something that has to be defined as a major struggle in order to have people understand the complexity of it and the intensity of it and the long-term nature of it.
Susan Eisenhower, what are we, in your judgment, doing right and wrong in the face of this complex challenge that Dr. Albright has just described?
Well, I think one of the striking things in the immediate aftermath of this terrible set of events on September 11th last year is that people suddenly became shocked into a new state. And there has been really an emergence of consciousness about America's place in the world. So much has been said on this in the last couple of days about America and the end of innocence and other such notions. But I'm perfectly fascinated about what's happening to America on a person-by-person basis. And I think there's a very big challenge ahead of us. I think today is a very important day because it marks kind of an end of mourning. In any kind of death situation, you spend a year in mourning, and really tomorrow will be the first day of the post-September 11th period, I think. And I think we've got a huge challenge ahead of us. As much as anything else, it's inside of us. Reagan National Airport was empty today. And I'm deeply disturbed about the fact that America can't seem to find its bearings with respect to this great challenge to our own core spiritual drive and being. And I think that we need our allies, we need people overseas to help point the way. Many countries have had tremendous experience, not only with terrorism, but terrible casualties during World War II and before, and there is a lot of strength in many people and their experiences abroad, and I think we have to reach out and learn how to cope.
You're suggesting that we haven't done that reaching out.
I don't think we have. I mean, the city came to a halt. I made a call this morning from my office, and there are offices all over the United States of America closed today. And while I think it's very appropriate for today, because this is a period of national mourning, tomorrow I hope Americans are going to stand up and say, we're better than this, we're stronger than this, because otherwise the terrorists have won. This is exactly what they wanted us to do. They wanted us to go home, stop working, stop going about our business, stop taking our children to school. And I, for one, am going to be there every day, just as I always have done. And maybe I am inside the security parameter of the White House, my office building is, but we're going to work. And we're going to show them that we're stronger than that, and we're tougher than that.
Cardinal McCarrick, your view, please.
Well, when you asked the question in the beginning about how this affected, especially the young people, there are so many of them here in the audience tonight, I thought 10, 15 years ago, when we were still in that nuclear age, we were still in the age of deterrent, and they were saying that young people were saying, well, is there anything to live for? Is there going to be a world? Are we going to end up with a terrible nuclear catastrophe? And is there something to hope for? And a lot of young people were sort of opting out of society. And then about 10 years ago, when the Iron Curtain fell and things looked like they were getting better, young people began to say, hey, you know, I'm going to have a life. I'm going to be able to do something. And now this comes. And I think what's important is that we don't let this put us back, that we don't allow this new terrifying thing, this faceless, nameless specter that is around and that we've seen around, is that he said that with no respect for us at all, not even to give us a note to say what they're doing, that this kind of thing can really upset a generation. It can upset a whole society. And I think that our challenge is to do two things. First of all, to assure the young people that you can go on living. That as Susan said, that you have to go on. You have to go on and keep living. You have to do the things that you're supposed to do. You have to grow. You have to cope. You have to produce. But at the same time, you have to try to find let me say spiritual, you have to try to find the spiritual rationale that gives you the strength to do that. I think there are the challenges in our society.
Ella, you and I are old enough to remember the Reagan administration.
We all.
And you remember that President Reagan often referred to the United States in an almost mystical way as the city on the hill, almost as if we were detached from reality, cut off, something incredibly special. Is it possible that 9/11 has now brought us down from that hill and that we're no longer cut off, we're simply one of the boys now, the same as everybody else?
Well, the city on the hill can be endangered as well. We don't have to come down for that. The danger is everywhere. What we learned, I think, from 9/11 is that we are all vulnerable, we are all mortal, and that hate has power. That is probably the worst lesson that they tried to give us, and we learned it. Hate has terrible power, terrifying power. These 19 men didn't need atom bombs. They didn't even need machine guns. They didn't even need guns, not even knives, with plastic knives. But they had a power, hatred. How is one to explain or to understand or to comprehend such depths of hatred? They wanted to die, all right. A martyr is not somebody who kills, but somebody who dies. So all of a sudden, a perversion occurred that day, a perversion of faith, of language, of definitions, of attitudes, even of idealism. And that is something, I think, that we are learning, although we are still, I hope, sometimes at least, on the city, on the hill. Of course, now we realize that the world is around us, and now the whole world is in danger. We are no longer alone, which means the solitude of America, we called it isolation. I prefer the word solitude. But the solitude of our nation, I think, is no longer what it used to be. But then maybe it never was.
Susan Eisenhower, listening to you before, I have the impression that you may still believe in the city on the hill idea for America. Was I misreading you?
Well, I guess what I was really saying is I think the challenge is to carve a way forward because this was a terrible, terrible set of events, and of course nobody could express it more eloquently than Ellie. Mm-hmm. But it was a terrible set of events, and there's going to be now really the necessity to find a way forward. I hope that the events of a year ago were the worst that this generation is going to see, but we've got a very dangerous road ahead. And I think it's going to require a lot more from all of us. We're going to have a determination to go back and get started again.
You're saying something that leads so directly into the set of polling data that I have in front of me here. I've been absorbed for the past week in looking at polls, and I am intrigued by what they appear to be saying. Because if you're right, these polls may be wrong. And polls have been known to be wrong, so there's no big deal about that. But for example, the latest Pew poll, which is a very serious poll, very good poll, it says that 97% of the American people know exactly where they were on 9/11 when they heard about the planes going into the Pentagon, the planes going in to the Twin Towers. And yet, the same poll says that only 16% of the American people feel that 9/11 affected them in a major way, in a meaningful, significant way. Which you can turn that around and say that 84% of the American people polled do not think that 9/11 has really changed this country in any large and significant way. How do you read this? I mean, you're a professor. Tell me.
Well, and I also know a lot about the Pew poll, but I think that what it depends on, to a great extent, is where you live. And I think what is interesting, I talked to people in New York today, and they said that in New York, people were really walking around in a completely dazed state again. So that kind of the way that things had changed in the last year, and recently when I was in New York, it seemed that it was kind of back to where it was. And again today, I think they've been dazed. I think people who travel a lot are affected by it, but vast parts of America really do not understand it because it doesn't affect them beyond that moment of the day.
But the president has been talking to them. There's nationwide television. People do watch it. They do read his statements. He and the administration have made a very serious, determined effort to explain, or try to explain, that this is war, that this is a new kind of war, that we're living in a new environment, and we have to take this serious.
But I think part of the problem is, and I think we've all both given and heard this message, which is take it seriously, but don't be paralyzed. We're under an orange alert, but keep going. And I think it is very hard to sort that message out. And I agree with Susan. I think we have to pick ourselves up and go. But that doesn't mean that you don't absorb it. But I think for a lot of people, that's a very hard mixed message to deal with. And I think the issue, if I might, about the position of the United States, I hope we spend a little bit more time talking about this, because I think that is the major issue here. I have always believed that the United States is a very special country. And I used to talk about it as the indispensable nation. And I believe that we are indispensable. I never, however, said alone. And I think that it means that we have a leadership position, and because of our wealth and our position, we have responsibilities. A part of a previous Pew poll talked about the fact that they were trying to determine whether what had happened was because people hated America. And in that poll that came out at the end of last year, after 9/11, there were many things, but one thing that they said was that people did not dislike American technology or American culture. What they were unhappy about was that they thought we had contributed to the gap between the rich and the poor. So in other words, we were selfish. And I think that is one of the issues that I think we need to talk about, because I think we are more a part of the world. And 9/11, because it was the United States, had an even deeper effect. But we have this feeling that this has only happened in the United States. I think, Susan, you said that, you know, there are thousands of people that die other places. And somehow we have to keep that leadership role, but at the same time be able to identify with the fact that other people are dying in other places, maybe in less dramatic ways, but that somehow that empathy of a great nation, I think what's happened, there's been a dissipation of a lot of the great love and admiration and sympathy that was there on 9/12 and 9/14, but maybe by February, people didn't hear it that way anymore.
Colin McCarrick, from the point of view of the pulpit, do you have a sense that the American people were indeed very worried immediately after 9/11, but as the months went by, as there was not a follow-up 9/11, most Americans, regardless almost of where they lived, began to ease off?
Marvin, I think that's certainly true. I think what happened right at the beginning is that our churches, our synagogues, our temples were filled to overflowing. That lasted maybe 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks, but we go back into our regular routines. And I think that's why you had 86% or 84% saying, well, it doesn't make that much difference. I think, though, that we've touched on something, Madeline touched on something, which is very, very important. The sense of who we are in the world. Elie said earlier that the oceans they're no longer the barricade. The city on the hill is a city with other hills around it and ways up and down. I think one of the things we had to do in our country is somehow to get the message across to people. And I think we've been trying to do it from the pulpit, from all pulpits, to get the message across to people that your neighbor isn't somebody just who lives across the street. Your neighbor is someone who lives across the world. That the old Roman philosopher said, I'm a person, and nothing that is human can be foreign to me. So that our responsibility, as Madeline said, our responsibility as a great nation, as a leader of the nations, means that we can't just live for ourselves. I've been very much involved in third world debt and problems like that. And this is a responsibility for all of us. We cannot go to bed filled every night and not worry about places all around the world where people are not going to bed at all because they're scrounging around looking for some scraps to eat because they don't have anything. So I think maybe this new crypto war that we're in, you described so well, Marvin, maybe this new adventure is a way for us to see that we have to plug in to many different parts of life, many different parts of this planet, and become more aware of the needs of other people. Otherwise, we'll never overcome terrorism. Otherwise, we'll never find that real peace that we seek so much as a nation.
And yet, I have the impression from the public statements of our political leaders, they may not be thinking as much of what you have just said, Cardinal McCarrick, as they are about the immediate needs of defending the United States of America. That is their responsibility as they see it. And the President has spoken, for example, about preemptive American military action. And the Vice President said the other day that if we had known 2 or 3 days before 9/11 that there was going to be this kind of an attack, and if we had known where it might have come from, we would have taken preemptive action. Question was asked, would you? He said, absolutely. Now, to me, that makes perfect sense. If you know that you're being attacked and it's coming from there, go hit them first. But that then leads to a very large and, in terms of American history, historic breakthrough in diplomacy, that we would now have the right, take it upon ourselves, to have preemptive military action if we sense that a likely threat exists here, there, or elsewhere. What kind of a world might, Elie, be envisaged by that kind of doctrine actually in action?
Maybe it's a matter of semantics as well. I would call it intervention, not preemptive operation. But I believe in intervention. I believe that a great power is great not because it has a greater army or more money, but because it has principles. And therefore, when there were massacres in the Balkans, I was for intervention to stop them. And I would have been for American and Allied intervention to stop the bloodshed and the massive violation of human rights in other countries. We do it all the time with words. What is our role as teachers or writers? With words. When there were massive violations in the former Soviet Union, we spoke and went there, and we did it together. Now, if I were a person with authority, let's say, in government, I would probably use more than words, or maybe words would be enough. But I would say the question is a little bit higher, if I may say so. Our nation has suffered on 9/11. We were wounded. And that day, the nation was one. But I do not believe that suffering confers any privileges. I believe that what matters is what we do with suffering. And the question, therefore, is, have we become a better people, a better nation as a result of 9/11?
Have we?
First of all, towards our own people. Have the communities in America come closer? Have we really opened our hearts, not only our doors and our op-ed pages, but really to come close, to understand each other, and to say, since we now are together in fear, can we be united in hope? And if we say yes, then we should say, what about the whole world? What about the children who suffered? We have to do our own soul searching. Not to say where did we go wrong to deserve such punishment, but in general, where do we go wrong when we don't use our ability, our ideals and ideas, and our wealth and our power to help people who need us, who have nobody else but us? That really, I think, is something that in this year to come, which is the year after the morning, that we must ask ourselves.
Dr. Albright?
Well, I believe in humanitarian intervention. I spent a lot of my time trying to make that happen. And it was done because we were dealing with somebody who is now sitting in The Hague accused of war crimes. So it isn't just preemption, we're getting into very difficult definitional aspects. I agree with Ellie that we are all the time intervening verbally. But there is the question that we need to ask ourselves, if we all of a sudden have a doctrine of preemption, does it give precedent, for instance, to India to decide to bomb in Pakistan or other aspects like that? So I think that all of us, whether in academics or in public life, are going to have to be much more careful with the vocabulary that we use and try to define it more closely, because for me, we are in an entirely new world. We finally, unfortunately, have a definition other than the post-Cold War world. Everybody was searching for a word. We certainly didn't wish this on us, but I think that we have a new world and we need to deal with it. And so I think we have to, I do support humanitarian intervention. I think practically, if one were to say we're going to hit wherever this is coming from, I'd like to make sure that it really is coming from that place. Because unfortunately I have more experience with this in terms of really knowing whether a place that you think maybe this is coming from is really the place. During the Kosovo War, for instance, accidents happen, unfortunately. You hit someplace you shouldn't have. I spent a lot of time about the Chinese embassy. So I think that, I think it's more, I hate always people who say it's more complicated, but it is. And I think that we are, all of us, whatever line of work we're in, we're going to have to be more careful with these definitions, because when the United States sets precedent, by golly, it's a pretty big precedent.
Marvin, I'd like to add something
Please.
there. I think it's very easy to say we would have taken action if we'd known a couple of days in advance without getting into the debate about how much we knew before September 11th and whether that should have filtered its way to the top. The truth of the matter is what makes this different than, say, World War II, what makes this different than Pearl Harbor, for instance, is that, in fact, who would you have struck a couple of days in advance? It turns out that the hijackers were not Afghan. They weren't Palestinians. They were Saudis and Egyptians, and they were our allies. So this is what makes this particular situation so extremely difficult. Terrorism is like a cancer, and you can get rid of cancer by killing the patient, of course, but you know, it takes something very special here. It takes special surgery, which means that we're in a very, very different situation than World War II. And I think that's another reason why such a large portion of the American people don't feel touched by the 9/11 events. If they weren't living in Washington, Pennsylvania, or New York, they're detached from it, except if they go to the airport. But basically, they have to see this on TV. No one has yet said we're going to reinstitute the draft, and everybody age 18 should go down to their draft bureau. When we get to that stage, there will be, you know, a kind of collective consciousness about the consequences. But because this is so different, because this is really surgery that we have to do here. I think it's going to be much more complicated.
If we go from the a discussion of sort of external policy to go internal, in wartime, there is a traditional, Cardinal McCarrick, there's a traditional clash between personal freedom and national security as it is perceived by the government, for example. And there have been any number of illustrations in past American wars where presidents decided to move too dramatically against American citizens. World War II, Japanese Americans were hauled off and sent to concentration camps. And John Adams with the Alien and Sedition laws, and Abraham Lincoln with suspending the writ of habeas corpus. Now, 9/11 happens, the president asks Congress, and Congress very willingly and quickly passes the USA Patriot Act. The very name Patriot Act suggests that, you know, be a patriot, it's better. And most people were. So it was easy, there wasn't even a discussion. But now, for the reasons we talked about before, there are questions being raised. Do you think right now that there is a danger that the U.S. may be moving too quickly toward action that could dramatically cut into the personal freedom of the American citizen?
Well, I would say there's always a danger. Whenever you leave the realm of organized jurisprudence and move in another direction, there's always a danger. Whether the danger is justified, I think, is the problem. What is the value of the common good? You know, very often we move away from the idea of the stress, the tension between the common good and the individual's rights. I think that in some cases, certainly, it is the common good demands that for the good of the majority of the people, you have to give up some privileges. Now, can the government ask you to give up some definite rights? There, I think you have to look at it case by case and see what the circumstances are in the individual situation. I think that certainly war, and this is a war, I think Madeline was defining it with her own tremendous experience in different ways, but I think it is a war of some kind, a crypto war, a war in quotation marks, but it's a war. And when you have a war, there are certain things that the common good demand that society and all the people in society have to accept. What does that mean? Detention without any appeal? Does that mean that you can take habeas corpus away? Does that mean that you can begin to censor? Well, I think in some areas, some of those things may be possible. Others, I think not. I think
Well, do you feel up to this point that the government has taken action that you find troublesome?
Well, I find troublesome in detention. I find that is a difficult thing, where someone can be detained and then after a few days they can be re-detained without really getting a hearing. I find that is a problem. That would be one of the instances where I would have difficulty. Now, the government may say, we can't let this person go because this person is a significant witness, a significant source of information. Well, then you run into that question. I think there, each individual case has to be determined on its merits, but I do have concerns about detention without charging it, without bringing before a judge.
You know, the Vice President was saying several times over the last couple of days on television interview programs that, quote, there have to be limits on what the government, unquote, then put the paraphrasing, on what the government can tell Congress. No, you've had certain experiences in this respect as Secretary of State. We are now at war, and let's assume that's it. And it's a very special war, as you've all described. But there are people out there, as Ellie has said, who don't wish us well and who have hatred in them and would like to destroy this country and its system. And the government of the United States, the Vice President, the President, have information that in their judgment, they really ought not tell Congress. Because if you tell Congress, it'll leak. That's what Cheney said. That's probably been your experience as well. How do you draw the line there as a government official between leveling with the Congress and holding back information? And now with the war on terrorism, the administration feels more justified in holding back.
Well, I have been on both sides of this, having worked for Senator Muskie and then worked in 2 administrations. And what I have really thought about a lot is that the Constitution has set it up for Congress and the executive branch to work together. It's deliberately written in such a way as not to give ultimate power to the executive branch. And I must say it's often irritating when you are in the executive branch and you are summoned up there and you have to answer questions. But there are ways of conveying information in closed, classified hearings to a group of people who are elected. And they are more elected than any executive branch person, except for the President and Vice President. And I think there's an obligation to at least set up a system whereby you can provide information in a closed hearing. I think the thing that happens that is very difficult, and I speak from experience, is that many of the hearings, I used to call them yellings, because basically they just yell at you about something and they don't want an answer. But when it is possible to have a closed hearing with the group, there's a small group that this always applies to, the leadership and heads of some committees, that you actually can and should have a very good discussion, because then the Congress has co-responsibility. You're not doing it by yourself, and Congress represents the people in a more, in a closer way. But this is very hard. I think, again, maybe I'm just too new out of a government, but there is such a thing as the executive branch never wants to have its power in terms of executive privilege, as well as the War Powers Act is something that is questionable constitutionally. So basically what you do is say, I'm going to come up and consult with you and I'd like your approval, but I don't really need a vote on this. But it doesn't mean that you don't have the discussion. And I think I'm going to try, this is not a day to be partisan. So I do think that a lot depends on the context of how a particular message is delivered and whether you have shared anything with Congress, and so it's all part of a trust issue. Today, Marvin, I was at the National Cathedral, and the new Bishop of Washington quoted from a statement by Lincoln that's on the cornerstone inside the cathedral. And I can't remember it exactly, but it was after the Civil War that they were talking about this, and that the truth is the way to resolve conflict. And it may not be perfectly quoted that way, but the truth is something that we all need at this point. And I think that if people feel that they're not getting it, then you don't get the support, and it just creates a more difficult situation.
I'm trying, I listen to you, and I'm extremely sympathetic to everything you've just said. And yet I'm trying to put myself in the position of a government official who has the responsibility to protect this country. And if that official has information, indeed information that he regards as hard information, that something terrible is going to happen, but if you begin to talk about that, you may cut off the opportunity of being able to preempt that with certain kinds of action on your part. So I'm thinking from a press point of view for a moment.
That's different.
No, well, this is all part of the process of a functioning democracy. The press has an obligation to pass on information to the public. And on any number of occasions when the press has not done that, I think the country has lost in the process. But turn it around. Should the press then have a new kind of responsibility in an age of terrorism? Ellie, does the press, in your view, should it be functioning as it did before the rise of the terrorist threat to the U.S.?
I think journalists, I used to be a journalist. Journalists are, I hope, human beings. And they have their own weaknesses and their own ambitions and their own strength and their own code. The press code is a good code. What does it mean? It's not only about the past, it's about tomorrow. We all know that 1911 was not the end of a process. Unfortunately, it was the beginning of a process. And we don't know who will strike whom where. Is Paris or London or Los Angeles or Washington? They will strike again. We know that there are 65 or 70 cells of Al-Qaeda in so many places, and they are there. So the journalists therefore want to know more. I think the journalist's duty is to reveal what he or she knows. The executives maybe is to try to prevent the information from reaching the journalist. And there is a kind of very healthy dialogue there. Call it tension, but I call it dialogue. It's a very, look, I'll do my work, you do your work. But one thing is also clear, that the journalist knows that if he or she reveals, let's say, a source that has been an intelligence source, very important, very vital to the government, and if you reveal it, then the enemy, because they are the enemy, will know that you have it. And therefore you may endanger an agent that you have there, or some kind of method that you use in order to know what they are going to do, to strike at whom and when. I know you won't publish it.
And time again, the press, when informed that something is very sensitive, will not publish. That is absolutely a fact. There are countless illustrations of that. But you used the word trust before. Is there now, should there not be a larger degree of trust on the part of the government in its dealings with the media? Because again, if you turn it around, it may well be that there is less trust now, and if you're in the government, you feel justified in holding back. In fact, in taking aggressive action against journalists, such as tapping telephones. Is there any justification for that?
Well, I must say that I think this is a very serious issue. I think you have to start out with the national security question to begin with. I think we have to remember that the executive branch is known to leak information too. I'd like to just add that. It's not just Congress. And I think you've got a network of trust here. The executive branch has an obligation to consult with Congress. Congress, after all, goes back to its constituencies, and the American people deserve to have a sense of what our priorities are and our objectives. And then you have this relationship with the press. It's very startling, actually, the difference between relations with the press, say, during World War II and the way they are today. And I'm sure that the 24-hour news cycle has a lot to do with it. We've got all news all the time, constantly, and I'm sure that the competition between journalists is so much stronger, and between news organizations, that this really adds an extra, well, it's a wild card, really. I think Dr. Albright had it completely right, that Congress and the people on the intelligence committees, they're fully capable of hearing the executive branch out on all of these issues. But I'm afraid there may be some things that the press will have to be exempt from. Just some things. I mean, the most sensitive types of information of all, because again, there could be a compromise of sources. We will not fight this war on terrorism unless we do have intelligence networks in place. And I think this is what, again, makes this an extremely difficult period we're going into, because the public does have a right to know, the press should be reporting it, and yet in order to be successful ultimately in winning this war, there have got to be ways for those who are fighting this war to actually fight it and win.
Yeah. Marvin, I think one of the problems here, why I have such a hard time giving it a flat definition of war, is that this is our state from now on. I think that this kind of terrorist threat is with us. Therefore, when you are talking about giving up various civil liberties, or this is not a short period where you say, okay, we've got 4 years or 5 years, and so we can give up something for that period of time. This is going to be our way of life. And that's why I think we need to develop that balance. The cases you cited were wrong, but they were rectified. And Americans have a marvelous way of finding that balance. But for me, the important part here is we're in this. This is not going away. And when we were talking about the young people, they're going to live in a different world where this is always there. And so the rules that we're making are something for the long term.
Mm-hmm. I want to take advantage of the fact that Colin McCarrick is seated to my left, Elie Wiesel to my right, and ask you a question very specifically about religion, about morality, and I'm going to put it in a ridiculously provocative way. But Colin McCarrick, where was God on 9/11?
Oh, I think he was right there.
He was?
I think God,
Why did he let it happen?
I think God was right there. I think that the presence of evil is one of the great mysteries of our time, but it is a mystery that can be understood. I remember Billy Graham speaking I guess a year ago, the day after tomorrow, we had the National Prayer Service, and Billy was saying, evil's a mystery, and you have to deal with it. You have to understand what it's all about. But it is, but it does not make you lose confidence in a loving God. Let me just, if I may, just maybe three quick things. Number one, I think we believe, and I think maybe all religions believe, that God has such a respect for you and me that he will not impose goodness on us. He gives us free will. It's one of the things that make a difference between the animals and the human being. We have free will. We can choose the good or choose the evil. This is a great gift that God gives us. It allows us to become great saints. It allows us to become great philosophers like Elie. Allows people like Mother Teresa to become so remarkably gifted in giving to other people. It also allows us to become like Osama bin Laden, like Hitler, like people who are so terribly evil and so terribly destructive, because God.
Isn't God, in a way, the way you're describing it, giving himself a pass? If it ends up bad, I gave you that right. If it ends up good, then I pat myself on the back.
No, I don't think so. I think because God, we believe, always gives you the grace to make the right choice, but never forces you to do it. Never forces you. This is the respect that God has for each one of us, that he allows us to become great saints and gives us the grace, but he never will say, you have to do this, you have to do that. You can walk away from him. We are conscious of sin. I'm conscious in my own life. We're conscious that we're sinners, and we're conscious because we can do things that God doesn't want us to do, but will not force us to do the good. Otherwise, we'd all be saints. Wouldn't that be wonderful?
Elie, you were at Auschwitz and you were at Buchenwald, I believe, with your father. And you saw evil in an indescribable, raised to indescribable heights, but you've described those heights. Where was God? How is one to deal with this question of religion at this time? Churches were filled, you implied this before when you were saying that immediately, the first 2, 3, 4 weeks, churches, synagogues, everything was filled, and then it sort of eased off back to normal. How are young people supposed to reconcile faith, religion, with terrorism and Osama bin Laden?
God knows that I have given him some trouble in my books. I have struggled with this question all my life, but always from inside faith, not from outside faith. It's because I believe that I have problems with God. Now, I had a teacher, a very great teacher, Shaul Lieberman, one of the great scholars that I remember in my life. And he once asked me, who is the most tragic figure in the Bible? I said Moses, the loneliest man in the Bible, who was either persecuted by God or by his people. He said, no. I said, Abraham, he was asked by God to sacrifice his son. He said, no. I said, Isaac, he almost died. He said, no. I said, who was it? He said, God. The most tragic character in the Bible, said my teacher, was God. God looks down on creation and said, look, what are you doing with my creation? What are you doing? Now, I cannot imagine God, but I can imagine what is happening in heaven a little bit when all of these people, in the name of God, commit such murders.
Osama bin Laden operates in the name of God.
Exactly. Don't they realize that when they do that, they make God into a murderer? Now, God, I have problems with his silence, with his presence, of course, but nowhere do we find that God is killing. But when these killers kill with God's name on their lips, what are they doing to their God? I don't have the answer there. I don't know. I can only know one thing. It's blasphemy. It is because I believe in God that I say it's blasphemy. And I say that with great pain because I would not want, I hope we haven't spoken about it yet. Whatever happened here in 9/11, I hope with all my heart that we are not creating more hatred in this nation or in the world by saying that all Muslims are bad and that Islam is a bad religion. We should never say that. Only the guilty are guilty. Only the killers are guilty. And there are people in Christianity and in Judaism and in Islam, good or bad. I told somebody who, before we came up, our problem was really, I think we are responsible for something else. We had many ecumenistic meetings since John the 23rd, who was one of the great popes that the world had. Usually it was priests met rabbis, and rabbis met priests or theologians. We forgot Islam. We forgot that whenever these two religions are represented in order to discuss what we have in common under God's vision or eye, that there is a third monotheistic religion. And therefore, all of a sudden, they were somehow cast aside. That was wrong. And this is the time to bring them back. I think that whenever there is now, from now on, a meeting of rabbis and priests, eminence, you must invite a Muslim. And I say that to people in every city, in every village. Don't forget Islam. In that case, you will understand Islam, they will understand us better. And I hope that we can then isolate the bin Ladens and help them protect themselves from such people as Osama bin Laden.
If I may, Marvin, I think maybe one of the good things that will come from 9/11 is that exactly what Elia said is happening. That now ecumenism, now interfaith relations involve not just Catholics and Jewish people, but Catholics, Jewish people, and Muslims. This is certainly now the common thing. May I just tell a story that I read years ago, and I think it was It was in one of Ehrlich's books about the rabbi of Nuremberg. There was this famous rabbi of Nuremberg hundreds of years ago who would get up in the morning and go out and take care of the sick, take care of the poor, feed the hungry, and do all kinds of things. And he would do it every day. Go out early in the morning, come back late at night. He'd be exhausted at the end of the day. This would go on and on and on and on. And Nuremberg got worse and worse. And someone said to him, Rabbi, you were doing all these good things. You get up early in the morning, you take care of the poor, you take care of the sick, you take care of the children, you take care of the old people, and things are getting worse. Why do you keep doing it? The rabbi said, imagine how bad it would be if I didn't do it. You know, I think that's something we have to consider when we talk about how bad God is. You know, I think God does so many good things, and there's so many good things happening. We should rejoice in the fact that there are so many good people in the world.
We've only got the briefest bit of time, so it's unfair even to throw this question at you, Dr. Albright, but how does this introduce a wholly new perspective, say, to the State Department or to American foreign policy makers, that they've got to deal on a broader basis now in terms of conceptualizing policy and acting on it?
Absolutely, because I think that for 50 years, we saw everything through the prism of the U.S.-Soviet conflict. Our assistance programs were given within that context to seduce countries to be in our camp, and so we have to have a different conceptual framework for this.
Our time's up at this point, and I would like to wrap up by saying I want first to thank our audience. You have been wonderful. There are any number of other things you could have done tonight, but you came here to listen to this, and I am grateful. We are all grateful. I want to thank our panelists who have been better than terrific, absolutely wonderful. I thank you all immensely. I want to as well thank the co-sponsors of this program, the National Press Club, the George Washington University, the Museum, and the Shorenstein Center on Press Politics and Public Policy at Harvard. I want to thank the Knight Foundation for generously supporting the Kalb Report last year and again this year. I thank you, Mr. Knight, wherever you be. And finally, my thanks to C-SPAN for bringing this program to all of you out there. I'm Marvin Kalb. Good night and good luck. Thank you.